Good evening, buenos dias, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Michael Sayman to discuss App Kid, how a child of immigrants grabbed a piece of the American dream. Teen entrepreneur, programmer, and student Michael Sayman created an iOS app development company at 13 after teaching himself to code. Since then, he has gone on to create dozens of apps which have been downloaded more than 3 million times worldwide. To moderate today's conversation, we have Mayor Levine Cava, who was elected Miami-Dade County's first ever woman mayor in November 2020. She enters the mayor's office following a 40-year career as a relentless advocate for South Florida families in public service and elected leadership. Throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of App Kid from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Thank you very, very much for having us. And I am super delighted to be here with this young man who showed the world that you can be young and entrepreneurial and make a difference. So, welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much.
To know that you are a product of our community also makes me very proud. And you set, as I say, a great example for all of us. So, your story is so far, it's only the first 25 years, is reflected in this great book. And you've given yourself a nice brand name here, App Kid. So, unforgettable. And we know that your story truly is unforgettable. It's a compelling, gripping, personal story. And we're going to hear from you some of what makes you tick, some of what made you write this book, your guidance for others who would like to follow in your footsteps. And so, with all of that, I'd like to start with this question. What made you write this book?
Oh my goodness. I think the biggest piece was I realized as I was getting into my career that the entire industry was kind of painting a picture of what it looks like to become successful in tech that didn't really reflect the reality that I lived in. And I felt like there was an opportunity maybe to highlight the differences in that kind of story and just show that, you can really make it an opportunity to succeed in the tech industry and the tech boom that we're seeing in ways that maybe don't seem like the typical. And I think like a lot of that kind of comes from being in Miami and how much of a different city it is and how much like those unique opportunities that Miami has to offer can give you like a totally different, unique perspective to the industry that I think is actually probably really valuable in the coming years as well.
Well, I love that answer. We're all here Miami boosters. And
yes,
of course
100%.
You grew up here. You circled around and came back
most
recently for at least part-time.
Yes.
So tell us about that. What made you come back?
So I think the biggest reason to me was I think after the pandemic had hit, we saw that it didn't really matter for all of us to be within this like traditional Silicon Valley hub, but rather that we could go back to where we came from and actually grow the communities where we're from into their own tech hubs, into their own centers. And I think like as we start to see the world kind of becoming that more connected world that we now see through the internet, I think Miami starts to look much more like a center for that technology hub than you would find maybe in the past. And that to me, I think was so exciting. And I thought, you know what, let's go back. And also I miss my family. So.
Well, as a mom with two kids that don't live in Miami, I totally relate to that comment. Are you listening? And I'm sure they're thrilled to have you.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Well, you were more than a son to them. You were a lifeline for them. And you talk a lot about that, the fact that economically distressed times, the recession, and you were able to step up at such a young age and help out. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, it was really hard, and I, looking back on it, I think I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have been able to help out in that moment. But I almost look at it and say, like, what would it have been like had I not had to have the responsibility of trying to help that out, right? Having not had that kind of the stresses of having to think about that.
Wow.
I ask myself, this idea about, we talk to kids and ask them what they want to be when they grow up, right? But a lot of times, if they're worried about, where, how they're gonna, find their next meal, where they're gonna sleep, asking them such a question is preposterous, right? Because they're focused on trying to survive, and so for me, it's like, how can we find ways to overcome those experiences so that others don't necessarily have to have the same type of stress in their life that allows them to truly ask themselves what they want to be and gives them the freedom to explore that stuff and their creativity, which honestly I think is like the more exciting aspect of it. And for me, I see it that way. Is like, there's so much from my experience that I'm grateful for, and also so much of it that I think I've learned from, and I hope that, like, as the coming years go by and we continue to grow and progress the city, we start to see more of that creativity shine through as well.
Well, that's really a fascinating comment that you're making. That obviously you started this creativity not thinking that
Exactly.
it would be your family's lifeline.
Yeah.
But then the pressure of being responsible
Yeah.
for paying the bills maybe affected your path in some
Yeah.
way.
Certainly.
So you say you ask yourself what it might have been. What are your thoughts when
Well,
you ask that question?
it's a good question. I think it would have been a lot more relaxing. It also would have been, I think I just would have explored what I loved more sooner. I think a lot of the avenues that I took with the apps that I made, a lot of times we're under the pressure of making sure that the income would be enough to keep things going. And if I hadn't had that pressure, I think I would have just been able to explore what I loved more sooner, in many ways, right?
Well, and now you're with a gaming
Yes.
company, so
Yes.
tell us about that.
Oh my goodness. It kind of brings me back to the joy that I had when I first started, right? This idea of being able to kind of not worry about, the pressures of trying to kind of, survive through things, and rather just explore what I love. And when I first started, I was making those games. Coming back to it now, working in gaming companies and working on gaming products, it's like I kind of get to relive those moments and also kind of expand on them. And that I think has been the funnest thing for sure.
Well, I know that one of the things that happened when you were discovered by these big tech giants is that you were immediately put to work with responsibility for teams.
Yes.
At the age of 17,
Yes.
you became a manager.
Yes.
So that obviously was a challenge.
It was really hard. It was really hard. And I think the hardest thing was, I look back on it and I think, like, would I hire a teenager at that age? I don't know, Yeah, it's tough, to think about it. I think there's, like, like I was saying, in some ways there's a lot that I learned from it, but there's also a lot that I think, looking back on, I probably would have done differently, and I think a lot of people would have done differently, and I think that kind of goes to the story, and why I think it could be helpful for others is not only will they see, oh, maybe, these are some things I can follow in footsteps, but also, oh, these are some things I should avoid doing, right? I think there's a good mix of the two.
Well, it's kind of the classic Peter principle, right? Where you are promoted to the level beyond your greatest competency, in a way.
Exactly.
But now, are you supervising? Are you managing? What's going on in your current role?
Oh my goodness, it's funny. I in many ways yes, and in other ways no. There are certain scopes of projects that I tend to manage that go beyond the scope of what I used to do when I was younger. And every time I kind of go up through my career, I start expanding that scope. But at the same time, there's certain skills that I realize over the years, they're just not my skills. They're just not things that are my strength. And if anything, I think what's been the most fascinating has been just understanding and becoming comfortable with the idea that I'm good at what I'm good at and I'm not at what I'm not, and just kind of letting myself develop that way without the pressure of I should be here or I should be there because of any one track. Right?
Well, as a manager now of 29,000 people, I think it's so important what you're saying, that we need to be able to be honest with ourselves. And really understand our own core competencies.
Yes.
And of course, we can learn and we can grow, but we can also surround ourselves with people who can complement
Exactly,
skills.
exactly. And I remember I would do some of these talks where I'd be asked, what's it like being a product manager? I want to be a product manager. Can I do that? And of course, my first response would be, well, what do you want to do, right? What do you like about product management? What is something you're passionate about? And so many times I hear what they're excited about has nothing to do with what a product manager is.
Mm.
And as we start to think about that, I realize, how much of this is there are pressures to seek certain titles and certain things regarding, like all of that versus just doing what you love, doing what you're passionate about. And I think so many of those pressures kind of lead people in directions that I think it's pretty clear I myself have fallen into many times.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure many would say that you're very fortunate that you get to do something you really love.
Oh yeah. Oh my
And you
goodness.
through the path, even though there were challenges
Sure.
to overcome, you've been able to come to a place where you
Oh yeah.
spend most of your time on things that really
That I
move
love.
you. Yes.
100%. If anything, I would say, I look back at my family that came from Peru and Bolivia, and whenever I travel there and be there with my family, I'd realize, I was lucky enough to have access to the internet here in Miami. I was lucky enough to have access to, amazing teachers in Miami. I had, this luck that had I been in Peru, it would have been so much harder to achieve. And without acknowledging those realities, I think it's much harder to kind of advance, the entire community.
Well, I love your pointing out that we have so much to be grateful for. Even in the situation you were in, where financially the family was struggling,
Yes.
you did have this great access and great teachers
Yes.
and mentors. Talk a little bit about school for you.
Yeah.
You know, there were some challenges around high school, and then
Oh,
you
yeah.
didn't go on to further formal education.
Oh, yeah.
What does that look like, and what does it mean to you?
I think it was really hard in terms of decisions to choose to go the route without college in that moment. To be honest, I actually think I would have loved going to college and getting that experience. It was really hard because I think it was a challenge of both the affordability of the colleges and not being able to have the resources for it, and the opportunity I think that presented itself with the tech industry as a whole, and how the college education really kind of was at odds with my career in that very moment.
Yeah.
And the pressure of, well, I need to make money now, I need to do it, led me in that other direction, kind of pushed me over the edge with that, right? And yeah, and when it came to school, I think the biggest challenge for me was kind of trying to explain that the app stuff that I was doing was valuable. I think it was hard because at the time it was somewhat new, and I certainly felt like what I was doing was fun and interesting, but it was a lot harder to kind of convince other people that that was worthwhile at the time. And I like to think now, as things have changed, that's certainly been the case. But as we start to look forward to the future of like technology as a whole, I see the opportunity as being able to bring about more computer science and more programming courses to kids as we see them getting younger. Because frankly, I'm more concerned about what happens with the technology as it takes over more of our lives, but we don't have the understanding of how to kind of, regulate it, and make sure that it's safe for children and families, right? And
That's really also fascinating, I must say. And again, you're 25, but you're wise beyond your years. How would you suggest, now I'm a policymaker, how should I go about trying to make sure that we're appropriately handling the new technology?
yeah, I think my biggest suggestion in terms of long-term planning for this as well is kind of making sure that within the education system, we have from the youngest kids in our community an understanding of how our computers work. How do they function? How do these programs come to be? How are these apps made? How do these servers store the data and the information and so much of that? Because as the kids start growing up and they kind of have that understanding, as we grow older, those policies and those the ideas of how we can make that system safe for all of us, I think will be much more evident, and they'll also be just much more informed. And that to me, I think is probably one of the biggest things we can do long term to address the issue.
Well, I'm thinking about the issues of privacy
Yeah.
and security,
Yeah.
so many vexing problems. And I
Yes.
think what I'm taking away is getting young people involved in those discussions.
100%.
And of course, we know that for young, one of the apps that you created had to do with protecting identity.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because I think like for me, I care a lot about self-expression and being able to share, who you are with your closest friends and learn to have types of connections with each other online. But at the same time, I think we have to be careful to think about how do those connections, operate on the internet and how do they affect our lives outside of those platforms or those devices that we use.
So it's a new kind of tech literacy, which
Yes.
is the tech privacy and
Yes.
so on. That's really so
Yes.
so valuable.
Yes.
And talking about identity, you also had some challenges with your own identity.
I certainly did.
Peru, Bolivia, Miami, your sexual
Yes.
identity.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about that and how
Yeah.
you came to understand who you really are.
Yeah, it was really challenging. I think in many ways because I was kind of pulled between identities in some sense. I think when it came to my identity as a Hispanic American, I wasn't sure, am I Peruvian and Bolivian or am I American? I was born in America and in Miami with this idea of I can achieve what I want to achieve with the American dream, but I also came from my family in Peru, and I was raised by parents who spoke Spanish. And in Miami, my teachers spoke Spanish, and my whole world was in Spanish. And so a lot of my upbringing didn't look necessarily like others. And so I always kind of felt like I wasn't sure which one I really was. In the same way, I think my dad was Jewish and my mom was Catholic. And my identity around my religion was always a question as well. And then finally, I think as I started getting older, I started realizing that maybe my sexuality wasn't the typical. And with that came a lot of fear, a fear of rejection, fear of not being accepted, fear with the family and with my classmates. But ultimately, the most amazing thing was when I did decide to come out and be myself around my friends and my family. The acceptance that I felt from my community was amazing. And and I was afraid, right? But to realize the progress that we've made as a city and as a culture and how well, received that was around my friends and family was just it was the most relieving thing in the
Oh,
world.
I feel relief just listening to you. And I know that you talked earlier about Miami and Miami-Dade being a place of such inclusivity.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's what draws you here.
Yes, and that's what I think is going to kind of make the future of this city so important to the tech industry is the diversity of cultures and backgrounds that exist here. It's like nothing else in the country.
Yeah, yeah. So what advice would you have for people who are exploring their own identities and futures?
Yeah, well, I would say the first thing is make sure that you look at your situation honestly and sincerely, no matter how hard it is. Because a lot of times, like we were talking about, you might not be in the position to be able to freely share how you feel or who you are. And you have to be careful about that. And so a lot of times, I talk about, oh, just, come out. And the reality is you have to be careful. And so my thinking is be careful, be thoughtful, speak to people you trust, and have those counselors in your life that can really help shape your decisions, because at the end of the day I think while it's a hard world to trust in others, I think it's important to have those people that kind of speak to and help guide you. And then when it comes to the tech industry, I would say go all out, explore. We have the opportunities in the city, we have the opportunities, and we're lucky enough here. And I would say try and explore it and see where it goes, because this city is going to grow with that.
So famously, you taught yourself to code.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't that long ago.
No.
So how would you recommend for others to go about joining the industry?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, the internet is such a good resource for this, in the sense that when you want to go and look for something, you can find it. And it's really about kind of digging and asking those questions and kind of going through and taking advantage of it. So I would certainly say that by using the tools on the internet, that's kind of how I learned. But I would also say don't start by trying to read an entire course on a programming language. language, it can be overwhelming. And tech changes so often that I would instead say, think of a small project, a small idea, something that you might want to kind of build out, but isn't too complicated, and just start Googling and looking up on the internet how to build those things piece by piece. And eventually, once you have that project, maybe try and expand it, maybe try and add some features and grow it from there. It's an overwhelming space, but I treat it like a language. So the more you talk to other people in that language, the more you get used to it, the more you learn.
Are there places for people to get together and share and learn together?
Yes, so on the internet there are so many different groups. There are Reddit threads, there are Facebook groups, there are Messenger groups, Instagram accounts. There are so many pages on the internet that I think that's the case. I personally use my social media to just kind of share out any ideas that I have to get my peer review feedback from my friends.
Really?
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of
Okay.
times it's fun because others will share their ideas as well, and we'll kind of do this back and forth of kind of concepts and project plans and stuff like that. I think there's a new culture on the internet that's growing of people just openly sharing the work that they're doing as they're doing it, and people giving each other feedback and opinions, and just kind of making better products overall.
Well, that's very hopeful.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I need to do more.
Yeah. Well, you're more than welcome. We can certainly do that.
Yeah, there. Maybe you could help me set up a thread like that, because I'm all about participation, and we do
Yeah.
everything in a participatory way. But I hadn't thought to do it
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
format. Thank you. So that reminds me. Of course, you are 25, and I'm 66. And I understand you've called your generation the anyone can generation, which
Yes.
I love.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So I think the reality of it was, as I started growing up, I remember making YouTube videos with my sister in our house, and we would just kind of set up our laptop and run around the block in Kendall and just try and make our little. We had a 101 terrace, and we had our little a show that we'd make, and we did it because we thought, why not, right? We looked at the internet, we saw how people were becoming famous and making their own channels, and we figured we could do it too. And so then I started getting older, and I would see other kids doing more of that, and the internet continued to grow, and the opportunities rose for all kinds of kids to become influencers of their own. And we started seeing so many more people from different backgrounds having larger reaches. I loved seeing, there were a couple of Latino kids on YouTube that had a larger reach than some of the major media outlets in the country. And I was just thinking, how cool is that, right? Like that the youngest generation really has that potential. And so as soon as I realized it, I thought, well, you know what? Really, we do have this idea. Our generation has this idea that anyone can become famous on TikTok. Anyone can make a YouTube channel to teach people how to code. Anyone can really do anything. And that mindset, I think, that we have as a generation is really powerful. And I'm kind of, excited to see where it leads us as we go.
So this will be my last question, and then we're going to let the audience weigh in with questions. What was it about your upbringing that led you to feel that you could do whatever you set out to do?
That's actually a really good question. The reality of it, I think, is that I grew up with parents who dove right into this idea of the American dream. They dove right in. They started their business on their own. They decided to push through and forward because they wanted a good future for me and my sister. And for a little while in our childhood, we did get to see that. We did get to see what that was. Now, they even put it on credit cards and things like that, but we got to see what it was like. And when we had lost it all during the recession, when those things were taken away from us, when we lost our home, they lost their jobs, I realized, there is a life out there, there's a world out there that I could live if I put in that effort, if I kind of work hard on my things and I achieve them. But also realizing that there's two very different worlds. There's the life that you can live if you have these things that you can be grateful for, right? And you grow up in the right situation, and you have the right resources. And then there's a world where you grow up without those things, and what that life looks like, and the lack of equal opportunity in those cases. And I saw those two, and I said, well, more than ever, I'm grateful for what I have, because if it wasn't for those moments, I would have never gotten to where I got. And if anything, now it's about, how do we make sure that we get those resources to the people who really need them too? Because without that, I wouldn't have gotten there. And it's not fair for me to go out and tell people, you can do it too, unless, I help find a way to make sure that they have those same things.
It's amazing. What an amazing answer. And I'm so grateful and proud for the chance to get to know you. Offline, we'll talk about those opportunities. I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but believe me, I'd love to talk to you more about those ideas. So thank you. Thank you for the window.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This is great.
Well, there's more coming. And for the question answer period, I have a wonderful colleague, someone who's working with me in the office of the mayor to bring more technology to Miami-Dade and more innovation. Chessie de Quesada Covey, she's going to join us, and I'm going to step away from the chair, take my book and my water. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. It's great to be here with all of you. We're gonna Michael's gonna answer some of the questions that you all have. So if you want to type them in, we'll make sure that he's here to answer them, and anything that you all want to ask. So let's see where the first one is.
Let's see. Oh, we gotta kind of get in close.
We have to get, this is,
I think it's right over here. Here it is.
we're gonna get a little close.
All right.
Michael, what are your thoughts on crypto?
Oh my goodness, what are my thoughts on crypto? Crypto is it's a fun Wild West world of all kinds of crazy, flashy, exciting ideas that are popping up, and I have absolutely no idea where that's going to lead. If anything, I'd be surprised if anybody has any idea where that's going to lead. But if anything, the way I see it is it's a whole new world and a whole new world of opportunities that, who knows, might spring up something different.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time. I don't know if we've shared this before, but I was at Facebook.
Yes, that's right. We did talk about that. Yes.
So we do share that. I'm just going to keep on coming up to see these questions. What did your writing process look like?
So my writing process was actually somewhat challenging, and I'll say the reason it was somewhat challenging was I wasn't sure what parts of my book to actually put into well, I guess I wasn't sure what parts of my life I should put into the book. So I didn't know which parts that I felt were impactful would necessarily be useful for somebody else to read or that they would find valuable. And so part of the challenge for me was, do I write about all this, or is this not important? Or do I write about this other story briefly, or should I not? And I think that was one of the hardest parts about my writing process, was just trying to figure out which part to put. The other was kind of coming to terms with the reality that everybody has their own perspective of the way the world is, and realizing that no matter how I tell it, it's always going to be just my perspective. There are so many other people involved in the entire process of what ended up happening, that having those different perspectives and having them be able to share what they had was kind of my initial goal. And then I realized, wait, this can't be like a Wikipedia, right? It has to be a story. So I was like, okay, I need to make sure it's my perspective and that's clear. And just understanding that process as a whole was totally new. But yeah.
It was one of the things that I found so compelling about the book was how candid it was and how open
too
you were.
Candid.
No, it was so good.
A little too candid sometimes. But...
No, because it really took us through the lessons and sort of the challenges that you had.
Yeah. I think to be honest, that's kind of the reality of the world. In terms of just how we all live, there's no such thing as a perfect story. We all have struggles, and I would say certainly I feel lucky that my struggles weren't, the worst thing in the world, but they were things I had to overcome. And like anybody else in the world, I think it's important to highlight them, it's important to talk about them, and then to find ways to address them. Because, as I was saying earlier, without being able to do that, you really don't expand the pool of opportunity for people. And that's kind of how that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, and also the ability to reflect on all the learning, so that way you sort of grow exponentially from them.
Oh my goodness, just being able to go through my entire life again in a book was the most I mean, it was like a therapy session without a therapist to tell you like not to spiral, right? So like, oh my goodness. So like, there was a lot of it where it was basically just that me trying to figure out how to relive these moments without getting too into them, you know? Oh my goodness.
What coding languages do you think is best to create a PC desktop app?
Ooh, okay. So the biggest thing I would say in terms of programming, actually, is well, the challenge with the PC desktop app is it depends what you're trying to make. If you're trying to make a game, for example, using tools like Unity, definitely go at the extra mile, right? But if you're going to be making something simple, then there's a whole other set of languages. If you're talking about making, for example, a web page on desktop computers, then you're talking about figuring out how to use um, JavaScript or HTML and CSS, the basic stuff. If you want to make something more advanced than that, then trying to figure out how to use different programming languages like C Sharp and so on as well work. My advice, though, would not necessarily be to pick a programming language or necessarily one particular tool, but rather focus on trying to figure out what you want to build first, and then just start going on the internet to piece those things together. For me, that's kind of how I went with it. So after I made my first app, if you would have asked me how to build any other type of app, I would not have known because I hadn't looked it up on the internet yet. So I only knew how to make what I had made up until that point. And I think that's kind of, I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but that's the way I did it. And I would say there's nothing wrong with it and there's no shame in it. When people go to these tech companies and you see the engineers in them, it couldn't be more different from the way it looks in the movies. You see in the movies where these programmers are just typing and you see all these windows popping up 100 windows a second and you're like, how does anybody look at that computer screen and know what the hell is going on? And like as an engineer myself, I don't know what's going on in those movies. They had a whole bunch of random stuff that looks like alien software. I don't know. The reality of it is we have multiple tabs open on our browser with Google searches around different things that we're trying to resolve in the code that we have to write for the week. So every programmer, well, not every one of them, but most of them, usually have an open window on the side with the help tool to figure out what they need to do to resolve a bug that they're dealing with. And that's just kind of the reality of it that I've experienced. So I would say don't feel uncomfortable or defeated if you seem to keep going back to the internet to help you build the next thing you want to do. Because to me, so far, that's been the most normal experience with all of it.
Yeah, I think that the ability to go back and sort of make sure that you're learning and it's
Yep.
something that's always changing, and so
Yep.
being sort of kind with yourself as it changes.
Exactly.
Another question that we received was your thoughts on the Miami tech scene
Ooh.
and where it is now and where would you like to see it go?
So you see, the Miami tech scene so far for me, I think has been incredible in the sense that we've gotten so many people from the largest of the VC firms and the big tech money just pouring into Miami, wanting to be here, wanting to grow, their funds and their projects out here. And I think that's been wonderful. But at the same time, what I'd like to see happen next is really focusing on the community of the people in Miami and finding ways that we can get the very people in the city involved in it. Because, the nice new money is nice and shiny and great and wonderful. And, I'm really glad that that's here. But if we can't find ways to bring our community along the ride, I think that's not going to result in the healthiest of outcomes when it comes to the tech scene. And so for me, more than anything else, I'm just excited about the opportunity for us to kind of bring the community along and finding ways to do that and making sure that we reach out to the city, to the different parts of Miami as a whole, the county, right? Kendall and and what do you call it? Coconut Grove and Coral Gables and Hialeah, Doral, all over Miami, and making sure that it doesn't matter where they're from, they're able to tap into the resources that are pouring into the city.
That's a great answer. We have time for 2 more questions.
Let's see.
What do you think it takes for the younger generation, middle school and high school students, to aspire to work in tech and understand the many career paths in STEM computer science? And this is from Pau Correa, who is also an ex-Facebooker.
Awesome. So, what I think it really takes to kind of getting the younger kids into tech is not talking about it like if it were a separate, specific career track. Because, and I'll say it like this, because it's not a career track, it's a tool to use, like a pencil or typing. And the reason I say this is because when you grow up as a kid, you have a lot of different interests. Some people are into plants, some people are into medicine, some people are into outer space, they want to be an astronaut, some people love politics. And there's so many different avenues of passions that we have. And if we lump computer science as like this separate course that you can take to become a programmer that is independent of those passions, we exclude so much potential for people to learn how to program. It's like if typing today were considered a course of its own and a career trajectory of its own, where your profession was to become a typewriter, right? That was certainly the case in the past, but as we see today, learning to type is just one of the many tools that people learn to use to apply to whatever career they do. And so the biggest thing I would say when we talk to younger kids is talk about coding as just another tool, a pencil, a typing class. Now you have a coding class, and you use the code that you learned to write to build things that you're passionate about, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in biology, or in outer space astronomy, or politics or anything else.
What is the one thing that you want people to walk away from your book?
Okay, the biggest thing I would say is that they realize that the story includes somebody that isn't a genius, that isn't necessarily more skilled than any other person in most things, is actually probably makes a lot of mistakes in a lot of places where you read the book and you're like, well, you shouldn't have done that. And you kind of come to this conclusion that you say, all right, anyone can really do this. If he can do it, I sure as hell can. That's kind of what that's kind of what I want the outcome to be of this, and that's kind of the takeaway that I hope. And there's obviously things in the book that talk about like specific decisions and thought processes that I had that led me to the career that I had, right? And I think those are important to highlight. But overall, I think you walk away from the book. I would hope that you walk away from it saying, well, okay, I can definitely do that, and I can probably do a better job, right? Like that's kind of my hope with it.
That's awesome. And I think we're out of time.
No
Do you want
worries.
to let people know where they can get the book?
Yeah. So you can find the book on Amazon, Target, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you want. But most importantly, at the independent bookstores that we have in our community, Books and Books. It's available there. You guys can order it right now, I believe, as well. And of course, I think donating to these independent bookstores is extremely important, more than anything else, because of just the way that we see things changing in the world and the opportunities that we have with making sure that we keep everyone in the conversation. So with that, I mean, you guys know you can follow me on social media and we can have a chat and let's build some stuff together.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Books and Bucks.
Thank you so much. And don't forget, you can purchase the book on our website. And thank you so much to Michael and to Mayor Levine Cava for hosting this event. It was such a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
And you as well. Thank you for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.